So the story of taking the sword from the stone is a story about someone claiming their destiny.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining me. I'm Elizabeth, and I am here today with David Karchere, a spiritual teacher and visionary and an incredible man. I'm so honored and grateful, David, for you to join me today. I always enjoy talking with you.
What a pleasure, Elizabeth. So glad to be speaking with you and with your listeners and viewers, and to be sharing this magical thing of the King Arthur legend.
It's
such
wonderful.
An enchanting way to look at our lives.
Yeah, so I'm excited to learn more about this legend and about the workshop that you have planned. Let's back up a step. And there are some people in our community who have met you and had workshops with you, and there are some who don't know you yet. Can you give us a brief background on yourself and what your teachings are all about?
Sure, I'd love to do that. I live at a place called Sunrise Ranch in Loveland, Colorado, and I've been here since the year 2000. And we have all kinds of workshops and courses that we offer here. It is a working ranch too, so we have cows, we have chickens and greenhouses and all that. And I've just written a book called Becoming a Son, Emotional and Spiritual Intelligence in Life. So that's a cornerstone piece for what I've been offering in the workshops and the courses that I do. It's all about our human destiny. And I believe that our destiny is to become on the outside what we already are on the inside. So already on the inside, we're beings of warmth, we're beings of light, we're beings of love and gravity, all like the sun. And it's our destiny to learn to be that as a human being on the outside, to leave our mark on the world, to live our destiny. So that's what the book is about. I was there up in Kamloops last year doing a healing chant session, and just loved with being people up there in Kamloops sharing that wonderful work of chant. And we'll do some healing chant at this workshop, but the workshop, of course, will be focused on the King Arthur legend. And that legend is a legend of archetypal stories for our human journey.
So for those people who don't know yet about the King Arthur legend, I mean, many of us grew up reading about it in all sorts of different ways and translations. And for those people who don't know, can you lead us through a little bit of the history?
Sure. There's arguments about whether there was a real King Arthur or not. It seems that there was, and there are many stories that come from this transitional period between Rome leaving and then England being born. So that's the time period. And the story that's probably most familiar is the story of the Sword and the Stone. Walt Disney made a movie out of it, and it's told in all kinds of ways. And the story is of young Arthur having been adopted and not knowing that he was the son of a king. Finding his own sovereignty, and so that's a seminal story in the whole journey. And then there's the story of the lady of the lake, and how the lady of the lake gives him the sword Excalibur. So that's another seminal story. And then today, in the common parlance, we have this word round table, like in business people hold a round table, or academic people hold a round table. And that is from the King Arthur story too, because he had the wisdom to call knights to the round table, where there was equality among them all called together by Arthur the High King.
I'm really excited about this because in my own life, I always enjoy looking at things metaphorically. And so you're bringing these stories in and weaving the archetypes and how we can use them. So let's talk a little bit about what is an archetype and how these stories can be woven into our own lives.
Yeah, sure, Elizabeth. So an archetype, it could be described in many ways. Jung certainly described archetypes as something that was present in the mass subconscious. As I see an archetype, it's a character, typically. A character that reveals something about our inner landscape. So there's so much going on inside us as human beings. We have our ups and our downs, our moods, you might say. There are various energies coming into our life and various facets of our journey. And it's all happening inside us. So it's hard to describe. You can't actually see it with your physical eyes. So we look for ways to understand. Now, science has sought to describe something about what it means to be a human being, but all the evidence and all the theories and all the psychological data doesn't necessarily help us that much to intuitively understand the journey that we are on and who we are as the person on that journey. So archetypes help us understand that. In some way, we're all like that boy, Arthur, who didn't know what his destiny was. He didn't know who he was and what his life was about. He didn't understand his own sovereign soul and what that was. And so the story of finding this sword impaled in a stone is an archetypal story about the sovereign in each of us and how we reclaim the power of that. We're empowered by that sovereignty. So that is the story of the sword coming from the stone. And what does the stone represent? So there's another archetypal image. So we have Arthur himself, and then we have the sword, but then we have the stone. And so to me, the stone represents the emotional body. So when our emotions get frozen, as so often happens in our human experience, it holds on to that sovereignty. It doesn't let it go. It doesn't let us embrace it. When we walk around with a stony heart, we're not empowered. We're not fulfilling our destiny. So the story of taking the sword from the stone is a story about someone claiming their destiny, being on the journey of doing that. So it's magical when you see through the symbols themselves into what's really being said and why these stories in Europe and in fact passed around the world for centuries.
There are many cultures who use stories as teaching, and I think that we need it nowadays. There are a lot of people who are searching, what is my purpose, or how do I reclaim what feels like my lost parts of my soul or my power? And using that story as you were talking, it just seems like a perfect match in our culture because it comes from our ancient roots.
It certainly does. And for many of us, we have roots that Wales and to England and to Scotland, where these stories developed. So the stories themselves are very much in our bones, and they create a deep resonance with our souls.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is a workshop that you've developed. It's both this shorter workshop that you're doing in Kamloops and a longer workshop. Can you tell us about both the shorter one and the longer one and how you use these symbols to lead that workshop?
Certainly. So there's power just in the telling of the stories. So the stories themselves are just wonderful, and they resonate deeply with us, I think. But then we find ways to work with the symbology of the story. So with the story, for instance, of the sword and the stone, I invite people to imagine that their empowerment, the empowerment for the sovereignty of themselves is in that sword. And I ask them to imagine holding a sword that is impaled in a stone. And I ask them to recover their sovereignty by allowing for a softening of the heart that releases the empowerment of the sovereign within us. So there's an example of something we did in the workshop. There's also a lot of chance for interacting with other people and sharing your own life story and the relevance of the King Arthur legend to that story.
Nice. So in the workshop that's coming up in Kamloops, it's a 2-hour workshop.
So there'll be a telling of the story and then a drawing out of the meaning of the story. Then there'll be a chance to do some journaling, some work in small groups, some work in pairs, and then some exercises that help bring the stories to life. And those exercises are opportunities for a person to relate the story to what's happening for themselves, and then to do something about it that brings an empowerment or a learning.
Yeah, I think that coming together in a group situation for this kind of purpose can really accelerate somebody's growth. I mean, we do so much on our own, but to come together with a group of people can change everything quite quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I do believe there's opportunities for transformation in every day of our life. We have life choices. We have directions to go in. But it's special to take the time for yourself to go offline, if you will, to not be in the regular round of your life, to be with people who share your interest in their own awakening and transformation and learning.
It's true. Even if you don't know anything about the King Arthur legend, or if some of our viewers have never met you before or even heard about the work that you've done, coming to this workshop could be an amazing and transformational experience.
I know it was for everybody who did it in Abbotsford at a place called the Edenvale. And I also know that the healing chant that we did right there in Kamloops really went great. I had somebody come up to me afterwards and tell me that they had been chanting, or I'm sorry, they've been doing meditation, and maybe a little chant, but meditation for most of their life. And they had found it so hard to bring a stillness to their mind, a stillness to their thoughts, even though that was an aim of their meditation. And this woman said that she'd been able to achieve that for maybe a minute or two at a time, but that for the whole time, for the whole time of the healing chant, she found she went into a deeply still place in herself. So obviously this isn't a healing chant workshop, but I think that some healing chant in the workshop, but also I think we'll find a similar way to go deep, to do something very active and awakening that brings peace and understanding into our life.
I think this is going to be a very special experience, and it's coming up on April 11th, 7 to 9 p.m., and it's being held at St. Andrew's on the Square, and that's such a beautiful location.
It is. That's where we did the healing chant, and it's this old church location that was that's at some point no longer used as a church, and it's being used as a public facility, and it's being very beautifully kept. It was beautifully redecorated, and just is a wonderful place to hold a workshop.
Absolutely. So I'll be sure to put all the links below this video so everybody can check that out about that workshop. And I would love to dive in a little bit more into the other work that you do, David, in the community. And something I was reading recently was about primal spirituality. And we've talked before about primal chant and things like that. And this is a word you use quite a bit. So can you tell us about primal spirituality?
Yeah, I sure can. I think for many people, the word primal evokes something like primitive, which it is not really what it means. The word primal is from Latin, and prime means first or main. And what's behind the whole idea of our primal spirituality is that we don't have to become spiritual. And I think there's so many religions and spiritual paths that are attempting to make people over into something that they conceive of as spiritual. But primal spirituality recognizes that we were actually born spiritual. We were born connected in our souls to something profound, to something that transcends all the human things that baby is going to experience in their life. So primal spirituality is about reconnecting to the innate reality that we know somewhere deep in our souls, but we've somehow lost track of.
That feels so good to hear, that it is innate. Our spirituality is innate, because oftentimes we are just searching and seeking and striving, and it feels so much better to relax into the knowing that we are spiritual now.
Absolutely. Yeah, to relax into it, and to relax into the knowing and enjoy the knowing and celebrate the knowing. And then I think what we find as human beings, that the way we make something real for ourselves is to somehow express it into the world, to give voice to it, to make it real because it's radiating through us in our expression of life. So I think that's true of our primal spirituality. It becomes real to us. Let's say the quality of love, transcendent love, becomes real to us when we take it seriously that we have the opportunity to express it in every moment of our lives. It becomes real when we give form to it in our words and the resonance with which we speak, with which we interact with other people. And that's a lifelong learning, to do that and really feel that you've conveyed to the world who you are. You've brought the presence of who you are as a being accurately and with integrity into the world. That makes it real.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You also write about the human experience and how that is also a mystical experience. It feels like it's related to what you were just talking about, like just that everyday practice. Can you relate that a bit more for us?
Well, there are all kinds of things that are happening in our human experience, obviously. And I do think for many people, they spend their lives running away from what's actually happening in their own soul. And they try to cover it over, particularly the painful parts. Cover it over and distract themselves in some way on the internet, with television, with all the entertainment in their lives, or sometimes just by staying incredibly busy. There's all the ways that we distract ourselves from what's happening. But I do believe that something else becomes possible when we reconnect with our primal spirituality, which is we begin to have compassion on our own human experience. And instead of trying to avoid it, not face it, look the other way, distract ourselves, we find we can actually accept it and embrace it. And when we start to do that, when we start to embrace what's happening in our own heart, what's happening in our own soul, then we bring an influence into the human experience that's altogether different. Like, for instance, our sadness transforms when it's embraced by the being that we are, with our own compassion. And then if we can do that for ourselves, we can do it for each other. Like, if I know how to love myself as a being and have compassion for the range of the human experience that I'm having, I could do that for you or for anybody. I could bring that same kind of compassion, and I can do it with authenticity if I can do it for myself.
Mm-hmm. It starts with ourselves and with bringing that compassion and awareness and just a gentle, I like when you just did this, it's that gentle embrace for ourselves and our human experience. It's so important. We spend too much time running. So thank you for that reminder of coming back to self-compassion.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. I was just aware and sharing with people yesterday. For whatever reason, I found this longing in my own human experience that was coming up that I think is very common for many people. And it's a longing for home, whether they name it that way or not. And what's been their home for years in terms of the physical house. And they can have a family around them and still have this deep longing for home. It's like an ache in the heart. And I think there are things that happen in our human experience that don't go well for us if we don't know how to transform that longing. Like, I think there's a lot of addictive patterns that come out of a person feeling separate from home. So what I came to realize for myself was that what I was experiencing as some kind of disconnection or some kind of longing was actually a desire within me to celebrate the reality of home that I actually know, it's actually available, and that I can share it with other people, that I can be at home myself. And home isn't just a physical thing, even though a physical place can be filled with home. But home is really something else. It's being at home in your own skin. It's feeling your own primal spirituality and in being in the intimate space of your own being. That intimate space is home. And if I know that for myself, I can share it with other people. I think it's very natural for all of us as human beings to share that kind of space together.
Mm-hmm. And that's what you're going to be doing in this upcoming workshop, is really sharing that primal spirituality with this group of people.
Absolutely, because if you think of the characters in the King Arthur legend, they're about dimensions of ourself. So there's the story of the Grail. So Percival goes on a search for the Grail, and so does Galahad and the knights. And so what is this Grail? Well, it's a chalice, or it's like a goblet. And that goblet is actually us as a human being. And when we find the Grail symbolically, what's happened is we've learned to find our own capacity to be filled to overflowing, to have an experience where we're holding the goodness of life in our own soul. And that's the story of the Grail. So as we're hearing the story, it's resonating so deeply because the ancients knew what the Grail stood for. And so they told a story about the Grail that resonates deeply in our own heart.
That resonates for me as you were saying it, just as that we are the Grail, and our ability to be filled to overflowing with life. That really touched me. Thank you.
It's so true. That we're doing a tour of the King Arthur legend later this year. So I'll be telling people at the evening a little bit more about it. But we're doing a tour of the sacred sites associated with the legend in England.
Oh, wonderful.
So,
I saw this on your website. Sorry, yeah. I got excited. I saw it on your website, and you're going to England, to the United Kingdom, with a group of people. You're taking people there. When is that happening? Tell me more.
Yeah, so it's happening in the fall, and I can share with you the dates of it, if I can.
If people are excited about this workshop, or if they're excited about how the metaphors and the symbology of the King Arthur legend can affect their own lives, imagine going on a tour to these sacred sites with you and with a group of people. That will be incredible. Yes,
it's October 21st to 31st, later this year, 2017, and it's Discovering the Magic of the King Arthur Legend, a transformational tour of the sacred sites of England. And we'll be going to Tintagel, we'll be going to Glastonbury, to the Chalice Well, and to Stonehenge, and other sacred sites in England. And it's going to be a remarkable time.
Sounds incredible.
And we'll be doing things that we intend to do on the tour in these 2 hours. So having just recently visited these same sites in the autumn, I'll be bringing fresh in my mind the awareness of those places and the awareness of the stories.
Perfect. So this event is going to be amazing, and everything that you have and that you share with our audience and with the greater community and with the planet is so needed. So thank you, David, so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Absolutely. Is there anything that we can leave our audience with today? Maybe a small practice or a thought, something that they can use today in their lives?
You know, in the brochure that we have for the tour, there's a wonderful quote, a couple of paragraphs that I might read.
Yes, please.
From a Michael O'Deara. And I think you'd enjoy hearing from this man. He entitled this The Spirit of Arthur. And he says this: the spirit of Arthur is awakening, not from some bogus Glastonbury resting place, or even a remote mountainside in Wales, but within the heart and the head of every man or woman whose slumbering days are ending, as they step into their own power, not as a follower of anyone else, but as a blessed living soul incarnated on this planet, who, when all is said and done, is here to do just that which he or she has to do. And that may well be how Arthur and Excalibur have come to save the planet, not by actually returning, but through the legends of old, which inspire individuals to their higher calling and into action. That's from Michael O'Dear.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's absolutely incredible. It's so good to bring the symbology back into our lives and our culture. So thank you for that. And thank you for this today. I always enjoy talking to you and hearing what you have to say and learning about what you're offering. And so excited to hear from you anytime in the future again. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
And thank you everyone so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe in the link below and check out the links for David, for all he has going on, the workshops, his work at Sunrise Ranch, and for that incredible journey upcoming this fall of 2017. Thanks again.